it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and I made a pretty groundbreaking, life-changing discovery this year about myself, and it is that I am, drumroll please, super codependent. I have a tendency toward codependency, no rhyme intended. Learning this about myself has been so helpful for me. It's also been sort of a difficult reckoning, but it has also been so helpful. And as I have been learning more about codependency, more about myself in this context, I've also found a lot of links to codependency and high demand religions like Mormonism. So that is what we are going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what codependency actually is, talking about those Mormon links that I was talking about and just links to high demand religion, patriarchal cultures generally. I want to tell you about my own journey with this, what I've learned, how it's helped me, where I'm at in reckoning with the codependency stuff. The first time I heard this term, actually, the first time I had ever heard about codependence was from Bentley. He had started therapy. This was probably maybe 3 years ago. And he came home from therapy. No, it was after the twins were born. I do remember that. It was probably, not super important, but I think important context that I was somewhat newly postpartum. Within the first year of the twins' life, Bentley was in therapy. And he came home one night and said, "Hey, I think we are in a codependent relationship." And I became incredibly defensive, mostly based off of a misunderstanding of what that actually even means. So let's start out with a definition. I am relying pretty heavily in this episode on the book Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. I had heard about codependency before finding this book and realized, okay, this is a thing I need to start learning more about. Then I went on Audible and I found that we had bought this book, Codependent No More. Bentley had bought it. We share an Audible account. So I started listening to it. I was cooking in the kitchen, listening just to the preface, maybe the intro, and I started sobbing. Bentley came in from the garage and was like, "Are you okay?" I was sobbing because I felt so seen and understood. And I think what's so powerful about this book is that Beattie, the author, she is forcing you into like such a jarring self-awareness because it's not really fun, I don't think, to like find out all these things about yourself and how you're contributing to problems. But she does it with so much compassion and understanding for why people can be this way that you also feel really held and loved along the journey. I strongly recommend this book. I found it so useful and I gleaned so much from it, even just beyond the codependency stuff. Like if that doesn't feel like it's necessarily something that you struggle with in any way, although I would say I think we are all somewhere on the scale. But if that doesn't, ring any bells for you, I still feel like there's a lot that I learned about just like self-love, self-acceptance from Codependent No More. Her definition, paraphrased, is essentially a codependent person lets another person's behavior affect them and is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. It's rooted in excessive caretaking and over-involvement in someone else's feelings, problems, or needs. It often includes neglecting your own needs to manage or fix others. It comes with blurred boundaries where your emotional state rises and falls based on someone else's actions. It is most common in relationships that are touched by addiction, abuse, or even chronic illness, but it can happen in any relationship, and it's not just in romantic relationships by any means. It can show up in friendships, family relationships. Any kind of relationship can be codependent. I'm going to rapid fire list off some of these signs that you might be codependent. This is lifted directly from her book. Maybe you can take it as a little quiz. We love a little personality quiz. Do you feel responsible for solving other people's problems? Do you offer advice or help that wasn't asked for and feel frustrated if it's ignored? It's just funny. I'm like, yep. Do you try to fix or rescue people from their own consequences? Do you feel anxious or upset when others don't make the right choices? Do you base your sense of value on how much you're needed? Have you lost touch with your own hobbies, interests, or goals? Do you feel uncomfortable or guilty when doing something just for yourself? Do you have a hard time saying no? Do you feel responsible for other people's feelings or moods? Do you overcommit or overpromise to avoid disappointing others? Do you experience extreme highs and lows based on another person's behavior? Do you struggle to express your own feelings directly? You may hint or hope others will guess. Do you feel resentful when you give more than you get? Do you rely on relationships for your emotional stability? Do you fear rejection or abandonment so strongly that you'll put up with harmful behavior? And do you stay in relationships long after they've stopped being healthy? The biggest takeaway here, like the thing that I really want to underscore, is that it is about ultimately, I think, like one of the cruxes of codependency is about abandoning yourself in service of a relationship with someone else. I think that's such an important distinction because when Bentley first told me, like, hey, I think we have some codependent stuff going on in our relationship, I thought of codependency as just relying too much on somebody else, just as like, I guess, dependency generally. And I think that's why I was so defensive, is because I actually feel like I am an independent person in a lot of ways. And especially in my marriage with Bentley's work and how he travels, I was just really affronted by him saying that because I thought he was basically saying like, hey, you need to rely on me less. And it's not even really about that at all. It's basically about blurring boundaries between yourself and another person and your relationship. One thing that was really helpful back when Bentley was learning about all of this was he showed me this diagram that his therapist had shared with him where there are 3 circles and one circle represents you. The other circle on the far side represents the other member of the relationship or partnership, and the middle circle represents your relationship. And it illustrates how you are to manage your own circle, and then you can step into the relationship circle and manage things that concern the relationship, but you should not be stepping into the other person's circle. It's about boundaries in a big way. It's about understanding someone's autonomy, understanding your own autonomy. And I think another really big distinction with codependency that was so huge for me that I don't feel like I really internalized until this year, like this round of learning about it, is that it is not something that I think you can say to someone like, hey, we're in a codependent relationship, fix it. It is so much more so about having self-awareness around how you show up in a codependent way and then adjusting your own behaviors. Like that's kind of the whole point, is that you are the one who is in control and you are the one who can begin to set boundaries, begin to adjust the way that you engage with this person in order to create a healthier dynamic, as opposed to like using it as like, hey, you're codependent. The reason that I feel very passionately about that one is because I actually, in the friendship breakup I had, which I've talked about here and there on the podcast, I had a really close friend. We ended up having a cold turkey fallout, you know, after being friends for years and years, just stopped speaking to each other. And this person, I feel on my side of the story, which I will take a ton of accountability here as well. But this person kept pointing out that they thought we were in a codependent relationship. And at that point, I didn't fully understand what that meant. I'm not sure they maybe even fully understood what that meant. And I felt like that was kind of being almost weaponized, like, hey, you're codependent, as opposed to this person, like, taking accountability for adjustments in the relationship, if that makes sense. And to be fair, we absolutely were in a very codependent relationship. And I think that's why things ended up ultimately there ended up being a falling out. But I think that with these types of terms, it's important to use them first for oneself and making self-adjustments before maybe like pointing the finger of blame to whoever else might be in that codependent relationship, if that makes sense. And this leads me into my next point, which is a big, fat, juicy disclaimer. You know, I'm going to do one. Let me give you a little context first. It originated in the 1970s, specifically in the addiction recovery space, and it was a word that was used to describe family members who enabled an addict's behavior. Then, in the late 1980s, thanks largely to Codependent No More that I've been talking about, it expanded to describe anyone who lost themselves while trying to fix or control another person. Then, in the 1990s, there was this big self-help boom, and that kind of made it more of a pop culture, pop psychology thing, where its meaning got a little bit blurry. People use it as a shorthand for people-pleasing, for bad boundaries, for low self-esteem. And for that reason, it's somewhat controversial in the psychological community, the academic psychological community, because of how ambiguous some psychologists find it. There has also been some controversy raised, or a critique, I guess, of this idea of codependency, because some people feel like it critiques most heavily traits that are more common in women. So they feel like it's a little bit gendered in a bad way. All of that to say, I almost feel like the fact that it's not a clinical diagnosis sort of frees it up in a way, for me at least. Like, I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but I feel like understanding this concept and learning more about this concept has been really useful for me. And it is not so cut and dry scientific. It's not an official diagnosis. So in some ways I like that, because I feel like it's just a concept you can learn about and apply as much as is helpful. You can apply that. You don't have to be working within these boundaries of like, is it this or is it that? But I also think, of course, to my earlier point about my friend, it also requires care when you're like throwing around these kind of loaded therapy words. I just think it's always better to do your best to understand first. And I think that that disclaimer is important because there's some controversy around it. So if it's helpful and feels useful, great. If not, also great. A little bit more about my specific journey with codependency. We were at Disneyland a few months ago, and if my mom or sisters are listening, or my brother, I love you. I'm not sure which episodes they listen to or not. This is fine. We talk about this pretty openly in our family, but we have codependent tendencies amongst my mom and sisters specifically. Brief context of my family, in case you don't know, it's my three sisters and I. We're all 2 years apart. I'm in the middle. And then 10 years later, my mom had my little brother when she was mid-separation from my dad. So I feel like my sisters and my mom and I, we kind of have like one little ecosystem. And not that my brother's not a part of it, but it's just like we built a lot of dynamics, and then Mitchell joined the crew, so he's part of the dynamic now. But I just always feel like that's important context. We were at Disneyland, and as is often the case at Disneyland, emotions seem to run very high in that place. Especially now, I feel like it's almost gotten worse as like a mom, because you're spending a lot of money, you're with your family or friends, and you want to like make the most of your time. You want to hit all the rides you want to hit. Maybe this is just because I'm a crazy Disney person, as is most of my family, but emotions were running high. And there were just multiple instances where I was noticing that we were all trying to take care of each other instead of just taking care of ourselves. And ironically, that led to a lot more chaos than if we had just chosen to take care of ourselves. An example of this is one member of the family wanted to go to dinner at a certain place. I knew this. They had expressed this. As dinner was approaching, another member of our party expressed that they wanted to go to dinner elsewhere. Then I heard the other family member whispering to a different family member, oh no, remember we were going to go here. I want to go here. There's going to be better seating, et cetera, et cetera. And I felt immediately in the middle of like, okay, this person who planned our original dinner, they've done so much planning. I kind of felt like I owed them because they'd been in charge of a lot for the trip. And I knew they didn't want to confront this other person directly. So I was like, maybe I'll be the person who can talk to the person who mentioned the other dinner so that person doesn't have to. And I was feeling dysregulated. Obviously, both people who wanted to go to dinner different places were whatever. Instead of just letting people handle their own problems, I was feeling like I needed to handle other people's problems. And it's not only me who does that. I've also felt like I've been on the other side of that equation where I feel a certain way and then I can tell my family members feel the need to like step in and fix it as opposed to just like letting me feel that type of way, work through it, and move on. Do you ever feel like you left a high demand religion, but your mind didn't get the memo? Maybe you catch yourself overanalyzing everything you do. Did I say the right thing? Am I still a good person? Or maybe you constantly feel the need to apologize for certain thoughts just because the guilt from merely thinking them is so intense, even though you didn't act on them. These thoughts might feel like they're just part of deconstructing, and sometimes they are, but other times they could actually be signs of religious OCD, otherwise known as scrupulosity OCD. OCD is really misunderstood. The stereotypes make it seem like it's just about liking things to be super organized, but OCD can actually be incredibly devastating and target the things you care about, including your spirituality, morals, and beliefs. Religious OCD often shows up as unwanted, distressing thoughts about your morals or spiritual choices, or a crushing need for certainty about things that might not have clear answers. The distress can feel so overwhelming that it drives you to try to get rid of these difficult thoughts by doing certain mental or physical actions, like endlessly researching religious questions, constantly seeking reassurance that you made the right choice, or mentally reviewing your decisions until you're exhausted. Religious OCD can be debilitating, but it isn't something you have to suffer from forever. All forms of OCD are highly treatable with specialized therapy. That's where NoCD comes in. NoCD is the world's leading OCD treatment provider. All of their licensed therapists are trained in a type of specialized therapy that's the most effective treatment for OCD. It's called ERP, or exposure and response prevention. NoCD therapists understand that your spiritual journey is personal, important, and complex, and they'll help you build the skills to break free from OCD's grip while respecting your personal beliefs and choices. Therapy with NoCD is 100% virtual and covered by insurance for over 155 million Americans. They also provide support between sessions, so you're never alone in this process. If you think you might be struggling with religious OCD, don't wait. Visit nocd.com to book a free 15-minute call with their team today. That's nocd.com. We were driving away from Disneyland. It was also great, by the way. We had a great day at Disneyland, despite the codependent undercurrent beneath some of the dynamics. And as we were driving away, I said to Bentley, oh my gosh, we are so codependent. And Bentley said, well, Haley, of course, you grew up with an addict in the house. And I really appreciated him responding that way. I think it was a very compassionate way to respond. And it kind of gave me this whole different view on why we are that way. Because as I mentioned before, this term came to be within the addict recovery realm. And codependency happens most when there are addicts in the equation. My dad, he struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction for most of my early childhood, my adolescence, and my young adulthood. So it makes a lot of sense that the rest of us in the household, this was kind of how we adjusted. We became codependent on one another, codependent in our relationship with my dad because he was an addict. And a lot of times when there's an addict around, you feel like you have to adjust in order to sort of protect that person. Like I remember from a really young age, oh man, how old would I have been at this point? I would ballpark maybe middle of elementary school, 4th grade or something like that. And I remember something had happened. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we were going out with my dad to see a movie, and there was a fight or something I had done. Like, I think I kind of caused a scene about something. And we went to the movie theater. We sat down, we're watching the movie. My dad got up and left. And when he came back, he smelled like alcohol. And I immediately internalized that as, oh, this thing that I did caused my dad to go drink alcohol. And so I need to act a different way so that my dad won't drink alcohol. Nobody taught that to me. That was never said to me. I don't even know if that was true or not. If that's the reason why, probably not. But I internalized it that way. And as we were all kind of internalizing it that way and trying to navigate it, I just think it stands to reason that codependency ended up being part of how we all interacted with each other. It also gives me so much love and compassion, more love and compassion for my family, because we really do love each other so much. We want to take care of each other so much. And that's why we can sometimes act this way. And learning more about codependency, it's allowed me to realize, oh, I can still love and care for the people around me, but I can do that without resentment, without crossing boundaries, by first and foremost taking care of and looking out for myself, because it's actually counterproductive to try and care for someone else before yourself, because that does often lead to resentment on both sides. The biggest way that I've experienced codependency is in my marriage. And Bentley has an ADHD diagnosis, and I have an official control freak diagnosis, if that is in the DSM. No, I don't have, well, I do have an official anxiety and depression diagnosis, which is certainly part of the picture, but I also do feel like a pretty massive control freak. And I'm not even being self-deprecating. I just think that I can be a very controlling person. And I've had that said to me before. Like, I know that that's the case, and that's okay, because accepting it and having that awareness has actually been incredibly freeing for me. But when you have a person with ADHD, which the symptoms of that can often be not being super in control of certain things in their life, and then you have the other partner being a controlling person, someone who really craves and prioritizes order, codependency can be a result. And it has been in my marriage. I also think some church stuff starts to come into play here. So put a pin in that when we talk about where the Mormonism comes into play. Basically, I've realized that I have all too often made Bentley's business my business. I've attempted to manage him and control him and his life in ways that are not healthy and not appropriate. And I didn't even realize they were unhealthy and inappropriate, or I wouldn't have done it. But I have felt like I've needed to do that in order for him to, for example, like if he has a work deadline that I know about, I have taken it upon myself to like check in on the work deadline and to be like, how's it going? What do you need? How can we adjust so you can get this thing done? As opposed to trusting that he's a full-grown adult and he can let me know what he needs from me in order to reach that deadline. And if he doesn't tell me what he needs or express that he needs anything, then I can just assume that he's got it covered. Another really big way this shows up in my marriage is that I am so massively uncomfortable with Bentley's discomfort. If Bentley is overwhelmed, if he's sad, if he's working through something, I panic. And I feel like it is my job to solve it and to fix it. I'm actually rewatching Parks and Rec right now. Kind of random. I don't know. One day I was like, oh, Parks and Rec sounds nice. Even though I'm an office girl through and through, I still love Parks and Rec. And I've watched through from like season 3. I'm on the last season right now. And I was just watching an episode where Ann Perkins is, spoiler alert? Do I need to do a spoiler alert for Parks and Rec? Probably not. Ann Perkins is pregnant with Chris Traeger's baby, and Chris Traeger is like super positive and upbeat, and Anne keeps complaining, and anytime she complains, he's like, okay, well, I'll go grab medicine, or let me massage your feet, or whatever. And eventually he has to learn, no, she just wants you to listen and to say, that really sucks. And I've seen that trope played out many times in sitcoms. I know there's a Modern Family episode that has like an almost identical storyline where it's a man learning that what a woman often needs is not to have her problems solved. She just wants to be listened to. In my relationship, I feel like that dynamic is completely reversed. Bentley is really, really good at listening to me and my problems. Whereas when Bentley shares his problems with me, I go immediately into problem solving mode. Well, why did this happen? Well, how can we prevent this from happening again? And it's ultimately because I can't handle him being uncomfortable because my emotional regulation is like so reliant on his in such an unhealthy way. And as I've been coming to terms with this, I've talked about this a lot in therapy. One night I was telling Bentley, I was like, yeah, I am so sorry I do that. Because when you come to me and are feeling out of sorts, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes my reaction is to like almost be upset that he's upset. And I can't imagine how stifling that would be for him and how hard. And he was so gracious with me, but he was like, yeah, like I would appreciate if that wasn't always the reaction. And so I'm really working on when Bentley comes to me with a problem, literally saying in my own head, like, this is his problem and I can be here and support him as needed, but this is not my problem. It's Bentley's problem. And that might sound kind of harsh or like cold, but it actually has been so freeing and so, so good for our marriage and our relationship. And I've kind of taken that mentality outside of my marriage into my friendships, into my family relationships. I've just been realizing how much time and energy I spend worrying about other people's business and getting invested in things that just aren't my problem. And I said this on Instagram because someone asked me something, I think about codependency. And I said, one of my new mantras is, I am so glad that is not my problem to solve. Again, that might sound harsh. It's not that I don't care. I care very much about how the people around me are doing and feeling. And if ever I'm asked for advice or for help, I am there to give it. But until I am explicitly asked, I am operating under the assumption that I can offer support by listening and by being there. And it is not my job to solve other people's problems. That has been such a massive relief. What a burden lifted from my shoulders. I don't have to solve any problem that is not my own. It really has been so life-changing to try and internalize that. And I'll even find myself like just petty gossip of if I've heard something about someone and their marriage, let's say, and I'll be like, oh, da-da-da, to Bentley. And then I'm like, wait a second. This isn't my problem. And thank goodness it's not. And now I can focus my emotional energy on something else. I want to read a few heavy hitters from Codependent No More, some quotes that really stood out to me, and that will hopefully help us keep building this picture of codependence. Say what we mean and mean what we say. This is when Melody Beattie, the author, is talking about people who are like recovering from codependency. If you are no longer codependent, you will say what you mean and mean what you say. This hit me like a ton of bricks because I realized how often I was not actually saying what I meant. For example, Bentley would say, hey, some guys are getting together to go golfing on Friday. I'd like to go. Can we make it work? And I'd be like, I can't say no because if I say no, then I'll seem controlling and but I do really feel overwhelmed, but whatever. And I would just say, yeah, sure, sounds good. And then Friday would come and he would go golfing and I would be resentful and upset because I hadn't said what I mean and I didn't mean what I said when I said yes. This also works in reverse in believing what someone says to you. And if someone, for example, offers me a favor, like the other day, my sister, we were at the pool together and then I needed to run to the farmer's market to pick up my gluten-free bread. And she was like, I can watch the girls while you run to the farmer's market. Just, they can come over to my house, no problem. And I found myself feeling like, oh, okay, well, do I need, like, I wanted to do like a favor for her, or I was like, I just felt guilty, I guess, for some reason that she was watching my girls. And I just took a step back and said, I'm just going to trust that when she offered to watch the girls, she meant it. And I'm going to believe that she means it. Same goes when I explicitly ask for a favor. When I ask someone for a favor, if they say yes, I'm going to believe that they mean it and that they're not doing it out of guilt, that they're not doing it because they feel like they have to. I'm just going to believe that yes means yes, and I'm going to operate under that assumption unless I'm told otherwise. And that has also been really helpful for me because I've realized how many times I create these stories that are just that. They're stories. And it's because I'm not believing people and believing what they tell me and taking them at their word. I'm always imagining, oh, well, secretly they must feel obligation to do this thing for me. I'm really pushing back against that. Next quote, we don't have to take rejection as a reflection of our self-worth. If somebody who's important or even someone unimportant to you rejects you or your choices, you are still real, and you are still worth every bit as much as you would be if you had not been rejected. Feel any feelings that go with rejection, talk about your thoughts, but don't forfeit your self-esteem to another's disapproval or rejection of who you are or what you have done. Even if the most important person in your world rejects you, you are still real. I've been noticing a Utah accent thing where, you know how in a Utah accent, real, you would say real, or feel, you would say fill. I don't do that unless there is an ill word right before an eel word. So still real always makes me want to say still real. Anyway, you are still real and you are still okay. If you have done something inappropriate or you need to solve a problem or change a behavior, then take appropriate steps to take care of yourself. But don't reject yourself and don't give so much power to other people's rejection of you. It isn't necessary. So much of this recognition of codependency for me has been about, I hate to say it, but stepping into my own power. Instead of thinking all the time about what everyone else thinks or what everyone else has to say, I am really trying to consider first and foremost what I think and what I have to say. And I didn't realize how much rejection was connected to all of this because I feel still feel so sensitive to rejection. The biggest way this one comes up for me is actually around the podcast. I can't even tell you when I go to look at my reviews on Apple Podcasts, that's where you can leave like an actual written review. I mostly don't do it anymore at all, but occasionally I'm like, I should just go see just in case there's something there that I need to be aware of. It literally makes my body respond like in fight or flight. It is so scary for me to read feedback that way because I am so afraid of rejection. And I think it's because I have outsourced a piece of my worth and my identity onto this really amorphous, ambiguous audience, which is silly for many reasons, one of which being that an audience is made up of individuals that are all going to have different opinions and disagree with each other even still. So it's very silly to put that even as like one entity, but I do. And I'm realizing that I'm so sensitive to that rejection because I am dependent on it. And I want to feel like, and I'm working toward feeling like, regardless of what people's reaction to me is, regardless of what the feedback to me is, I am confident enough in who I am and in myself that it's not going to shake my world in the way that this quote describes. That friendship breakup I was talking about, one of the reasons that I think it hit me so hard was because it was such a codependent relationship. So much of myself was tied into that relationship that when I lost the friendship, it wasn't just like losing a friend. It felt like losing this big part of how I made sense of who I was and this big part of my worth even. I learned so much from that friendship breakup, and I'm really fortunate to have made some friendships after that friendship breakup, a little bit during the course of it, but some of my closest friends now have come since that friendship breakup. And I feel like I relate to those friendships in such a different way. And it doesn't mean that I love them any less, that I care about them any less, that I want to help them any less, or feel like they want to help me any less. But I don't feel like those friendships are codependent. And it feels so much healthier and it feels so much easier to navigate if there ever is like conflict or whatever, because it doesn't feel so high stakes that if anything is a little bit wrong, then my whole world is flipped upside down. Oh, I actually wrote this down as I was building my outline for this episode, and I was like, okay, kind of a banger here, Haley. It doesn't mean I don't love any less. It just means I'm not outsourcing my worth to the people I love. I think that sums up really well that distinction for me. Next quote. I know when to say no and when to say yes. I take responsibility for my choices. The victim, she went somewhere else. The only one who can truly victimize me is myself. And 99% of the time, I choose to do that no more. Another big realization for me has been that I play the victim a lot. I mean, yeah, I play the victim enough. I play the victim more than I want to play the victim. I don't want to play the victim. As Melody Beattie said, the victim, she went somewhere else. It has been so empowering when my immediate reaction to a situation is to feel frustrated by someone else. How did someone else put me in this position? Oh, Bentley's work makes my life so hard. Oh, the way this friend talks about this thing is so triggering to me. Instead of my first reaction being like, oh, this person is this way and I wish they would fix it. I feel the feeling. It's not about invalidating the feeling or the trigger, but then I think, oh, what could I do about this? And what is my role in this? Let's talk about Bentley's work thing. Oh, Bentley travels a lot for work and it's so hard and it ruins my life. Da da da. Okay, well, what can I do? I know he travels a lot for work. Can we figure out a way to afford more childcare? Can I cut down on how much I work so that when he's gone, I don't feel as overextended? What can I do to help myself in this situation has just been so massive. Again, it seems so obvious. Maybe it is to many of you listening, but that's been a huge paradigm shift for me. An Instagram quote story that hit me really hard was shared actually by Demi Ingeman from The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Very random. Shout out Demi. But it said something to the effect of, I unfortunately didn't save it or screenshot it, but I do remember it said basically, what is the role I play in my own suffering is one of the most healing questions that not enough people ask themselves. What is the role I play in my own suffering? And I think in a lot of my relationships, I've realized, okay, yeah, there may be codependence or this thing about it might be unhealthy. Well, what is the role I play in that unhealthy dynamic? And crazy enough, as I've noticed those things, I've adjusted. I haven't even needed to have conversations with people. I haven't even needed to sit down and be like, hey, I feel like this, and this. I've just adjusted. And a lot of those things have just improved because I've realized, oh, I'm playing into this dynamic. I'm allowing it to happen perhaps, or I'm engaging with it in such a way that someone doesn't realize that it's bothering me, whatever it may be. It's just crazy how those adjustments have fixed so much, and it didn't even require even telling the person. I could just adjust and then things improved. Another example here, the hot air balloon example. It was the 4th of July. We have a lot of family traditions around the 4th of July. One of them is that we go see the hot air balloons get blown up. This happens in Provo. They blow up the air balloons and then they go in the air. And I was excited to do it this year because I thought the twins would really love it. However, the night before this was going to happen, it was looking pretty stormy, and you have to be at the field to see them get blown up at 6:15 a.m., super early. We are usually rolling out of bed, Bentley and the twins and I, around 8:15. Well, Bentley goes to the gym before us, but the twins and I wake up around 8:15. So it's kind of a big commitment. And I was on the fence about it because I also knew the 4th of July was going to be a big day. So I texted my family and I was like, hey, I just don't want to set my alarm. And if it is stormy, have to wake up and then realize it's stormy and then I might not be able to go back to sleep. So I'm like, I think we're just going to not go to the balloons. And my family member responded and was like, oh, it's so fun. The girls will love it. It's a tradition. You should just come. So I was like, okay, whatever, we'll come. So I wake the girls up. We drive all the way down there. We're pulling up at 6:15 in the morning, and the balloons, they don't even blow them up because it was stormy. The girls were insane all day because they woke up so early. I was feeling so tired and cranky. And halfway through the day, I was feeling upset at the family member who had said that, like, you should just come. And I took a step back and I thought, she didn't hold a gun to my head. They didn't hold a gun to my head. They didn't force me to come. I chose to come because I am a person with full autonomy. And I made the decision to set my alarm and wake my kids up and drive down there, knowing there was a potential that there could be a storm. But I felt pressure, and so I went. It is my job to stick to my own boundaries and say, I will go if I want to go, not if I feel pressure to go from someone else. Obviously, this is so much easier said than done, which is why this is a whole thing. And I think a lot of us feel that. It's difficult sometimes to even understand, do I actually want to do this, or is this obligation? There's a lot of Mormonism that comes into play there. We're almost to the Mormonism stuff, I promise. But I realized, oh, this is actually a me thing. And I don't get to sit here and be resentful towards someone else because I made a decision. I am not the victim. And not being the victim feels really, really nice. Take it from me. Where does the Mormonism come into play? Or high demand religion? I do think in my research, there's not so much research on all of this, but the research that I could find, there are a number of people talking about the connections between high demand religion and codependency. The big, more general connections I made are first and foremost that within the Mormon framework, everyone, but I think especially women, are taught that sacrificing yourself for a cause greater than yourself is one of the best things you can do. Joseph Smith, the founding prophet, was a martyr. That's talked about all the time. He died for the church. He gave up his life for the church. The pioneers, and what a pedestal the pioneers are put on. They sacrificed everything, their health, oftentimes their lives, in honor of this greater cause. That is kind of the best thing a Mormon can do, is sacrifice their own comfort, their own well-being for something beyond themselves. Also, with women, this is hugely exacerbated by motherhood. And the model of motherhood in the Mormon framework is a mom gives up herself, her body, her dreams, her hobbies, her passions in order to raise her children. And that is one of the most wonderful things that a Mormon mother can do. It is to put aside herself for everyone else. I think of this with bishops' wives. I'm sure we can all conjure up, if we grew up Mormon, the bishop's on the stand. He's probably at church all day on Sunday, probably getting calls all throughout the week. And you see his wife on the front row with like 5 young kids, and she has to manage everything else. And that is really admired. That is really looked up to. Wow, look at this bishop's wife. Look how much she's giving up so her husband can do this role and this calling. On a more core level, I think that Mormonism teaches in its doctrine that above all else, you do what the Mormon church says to do. Even if you feel uncomfortable with it, even if you don't want to do it, you do it if that's what the Mormon prophet says, if that's what the Book of Mormon says. And that leads to a high level of comfortability with self-abandonment. And that's what's ultimately at the root of codependence. I remember when I was getting married to Bentley, and we had known each other a very, very short time. We got married within 5 months. And there were so many alarm bells ringing in my own mind and soul that were like, this feels really fast. I feel really overwhelmed. I feel like I want to slow down. But I had these messages in my head, as did Bentley, of get home from your mission and get married as quick as you can. If you find a worthy priesthood holder, then your marriage will be great no matter what, as long as you both still follow the Mormon gospel. There was so much conditioning that overrode what my self was saying, which is, we can just take a breather and do this on our own timeline. I didn't feel like I was able to do that. And I felt like I abandoned myself by getting married as quickly as I did. I felt that all the time on my mission. I felt that a lot of times with callings in the church where I didn't feel like I could really manage a calling when I was in the middle of college and also had a job. But I felt like you don't say no, you say yes. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. You just say yes. Speaking of getting married young, a huge dynamic of my marriage and the codependency in my marriage is that we were so young when we got married. I was 20 years old. Bentley was 21 years old. We didn't know ourselves. I had never lived on my own. I had never practiced making decisions for myself. I had never practiced building my own self-worth beyond the relationships I was in high school, the friendships I was in. I mean, that's a huge thing I think that you really step into in your 20s is, okay, who am I outside from the context of, where I grew up and my family of origin. And I never did any of that exploration without Bentley. And so Bentley became so core to who I was and to my identity and to my self-worth, but also to my safety. Like I just didn't know who I was in the world without Bentley. And I think so much of that is because of how young we were. We didn't have any time to figure any of that out before we were already so close to each other. And because the Mormon Church also in its doctrine says, once you're married, you are one person. And once you're married, you make all your decisions together. It's a very traditional idea of marriage. It also directly, I guess they changed this in the temple, but it says you hearken to your husband. So I felt like that was what I should be doing, was prioritizing Bentley and his well-being over my own well-being. There's also just the gender dynamics that come into play that exacerbate that too. There are a lot of factors at play, I think, that can make a young Mormon couple super codependent. Very serendipitously, so I can cite an expert here, as I was prepping for this episode, Dr. Julie Hanks, who many of you know, she is a therapist. She talks a lot about high demand religion stuff. She talks a lot about family dynamic stuff. She shared some stories connecting Mormonism to codependency. So someone asked her, why does it seem like, generally speaking, a lot of LDS families are very codependent on one another? I did not grow up LDS, but I am a convert and married into a very devout LDS family, and they cannot seem to let go of my husband. We've been through therapy, but I'm just curious to hear what you think about that and why it seems to be so common in the faith. She says, yes, here's why, and she names 3 separate facets of this dynamic. The first one is eternal parental calling. The idea that parents are never released from their responsibilities can blur boundaries between healthy involvement and overreach. Number 2, church-centered family unity. Phrases like knit together in unity, which is used often in church lingo, emphasize seamless loyalty, sometimes discouraging personal distance or autonomy. And third, success defined by home. Framing family function as life's ultimate success can warrant persistent intervention in adult children's lives. Then she shares some quotes that encourage enmeshment in families. Quick enmeshment definition: it's a psychological term describing a dynamic where personal boundaries between individuals, often family members, are blurred or non-existent, leading to excessive emotional closeness and interdependence. Listen to this quote. This is by Ezra Taft Benson, a former Mormon prophet. Fathers, and certainly mothers too, yours is an eternal calling from which you are never released. A father's calling is eternal, and its importance transcends time. It is a calling for both time and eternity. Julie Hanks says, this teaching affirms parental involvement even into their children's adulthood and beyond, even when adult children may need space or autonomy. This is what I was talking about in last week's episode about family reunions when I mentioned a certain family member who was basically telling their adult children that they should not be smoking weed or smoking a vape. And I think it's exactly this. You grow up hearing that it is your job as a father, no matter how old your kids are, to keep your kids morally safe, and you have a different idea of that than your kids end up having, well, it's going to create some friction because when your kids are adults and they should be able to make their own decisions about what they think and believe and what substances they put into their body, et cetera, then you have these dads who are treating their adult children like they're still kids because they've been told that it is their job to do so. And that's an enmeshed codependent dynamic. Second quote she cites, "If ye are not one, ye are not mine." This is, I don't know, she didn't say exactly. I feel like this might be in the Bible, but maybe it's in the Book of Mormon. And I heard this all the time growing up in the church. So this is from church-wide teachings. Families and communities are to be knit together in unity and in love one towards another. This emphasis on unity can be interpreted as pressuring members, including adult children, to remain emotionally and spiritually merged with parents or church, potentially discouraging separation or independence. For me, I don't feel like my family dynamics, luckily, because what Julie Hanks is talking about here is like enmeshment and codependence. I mean, I just said, I do think my family does have codependent tendencies, but I don't think that we are this way. Like my mom gives us a lot of autonomy and a lot of respect, and I'm so massively grateful for that, especially because my mom is an active LDS member and I'm an ex-Mormon podcaster to some degree. So I feel very grateful that she lets me do my thing. She does her thing. I think we are very differentiated in that sense. But I hear lots of stories of that not being the case, where people in families cannot differentiate beliefs from closeness. And so they think, oh, if we don't believe the same thing, we cannot be close. Therefore, we must believe the same thing. And I talked about this in the family reunion episode too, where some families think that Mormonism is the binding factor of a family, which is so devastating, because should not the binding factor of a family be love, regardless of Mormonism, regardless of beliefs, regardless of a belief in Jesus Christ? Those things shouldn't be the glue that holds a family together, I don't think. I think it should be love and respect and care for one another. But when you have these sorts of doctrines saying, no, the thing that is going to bind you together is a shared belief in God, in Jesus, in the Mormon church, then that can actually create, ironically, massive divides in families, because then people end up pressuring or judging other people who believe differently because they feel like they're not allowed to believe differently if they are going to be close. I screenshot another story of hers, which she ended up turning into a post, so I can link this in the show notes because I'm just going to hit some highlights. But she is pointing out why patriarchal cultures generally, so not just Mormonism, have a tendency towards enmeshment. One of the things she mentions is hierarchical authority structures, because in patriarchal systems, authority, which is often older men, is rarely questioned. And this discourages individuation, especially for women and younger family members who may feel obligated to align with family expectations, even at the expense of their own development. That, I think, is such a huge one, that regardless of family culture, because I was just saying, I think my family culture actually, we all do a really good job at this sort of differentiation, at least now in adulthood. But still, growing up in the church, that is not a muscle that I practiced a lot. Or when I did practice the muscle of autonomy, of thinking differently, I was often chastised by authority. I was often punished by authority. And so it became a lot easier to fall into line and just to do as I was told, because that's what was rewarded and praised. And so from a very young age, you're just not practicing having your own autonomy and thinking what you think and believing what you believe when you're in such a homogenous belief system. And that's probably also really magnified by my situation where I grew up in Provo, Utah, where everyone I was around thought the same way and believed the same way. And I've even found in adulthood with friendships, I feel like I'm friends with a lot of people right now, and we don't always think the same about a lot of things. And yeah, duh, no group of friends is going to think exactly the same. But I've felt some discomfort come up for me if I've had a differing opinion, of feeling like, oh my gosh, no one's going to like me anymore if I share this differing opinion, as opposed to understanding, no, differing opinions are wonderful and beautiful. And that's part of what makes relationships so fulfilling is that you have different opinions and you can share those and learn from each other. But I still feel threatened by not all thinking or believing the same way because I'm so used to that. She also mentions here gender roles that reinforce dependency. Women in patriarchal cultures are often socialized to self-sacrifice, prioritize caregiving, and maintain harmony, even if it means over-functioning emotionally for others. This can deepen patterns of enmeshment, especially between mothers and children. I am trying to be so careful about this, even though my children are so young right now. And when you are taking care of young children, codependency, it's like not a thing, because obviously when you have like toddlers, they are reliant on you to help them emotionally regulate and things like that. And then obviously as they grow up, you try and like slowly help them develop those things for themselves. But I often think about the weight on a child once they grow up and are old enough to understand it, of their parents' sacrifice for them. And obviously, you have to sacrifice so much as a parent for your children. Anyway, of course, that's part of it. And I think that's beautiful. But if you feel like your parents sacrificed their whole identity and passion and dreams for you, I wouldn't want that feeling as an adult child. And I've talked to a lot of friends who feel like their moms gave up everything to raise them. And now that they're an adult and they're doing their own thing, it's really hard for their moms because their moms were like, well, I gave you everything and I kind of expected the outcome or the reward would be you being this type of person or you believing this thing, but that's just not how it works. And that is enmeshment, because as a parent, you can't expect your kid to believe or think the things that you want them to. But as a mom, I can also sympathize with and understand why parents might feel that way. And I think part of that is having healthy boundaries. And I really try to have healthy boundaries around my passions, my hobbies, my identity. And a lot of that's a privilege too. A lot of that's even having the resources to have childcare. It's me having this job is really helpful in that regard. But I think that hopefully that will set us up to not be in that situation down the road. That's a wrap on Codependent No More-Mon. Oftentimes, I just think of an episode idea, I do the episode, and then I'm like, what should I title it? But when I was reading Codependent No More, I was realizing the links. This was during my break, so I was kind of just like, sitting on ideas, trying to be in a creative flow. I was like, Codependent No More-Mon. That will be an episode when I'm back. And now here it is, Codependent No More-Mon. Can't wait to get your thoughts and feelings on this. Find out how many of you are recovering codependents like me, recovering control freaks, recovering victims, all of the things. I'm just looking forward to your feedback. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. If you want to follow along, I'm on YouTube. I'm loving YouTube lately. I was just telling some friends, I'm like, because I edit my own podcast, there is just something so nice about having the visual element. I think it adds a lot. So if you're into YouTube, head over to YouTube, Girls Camp Podcast, Instagram, Girls Camp Podcast, TikTok, Haley Rawl. If you want some bonus episodes, I do 2 a month on the Patreon, Girls Camp After Dark. You can find that at patreon.com/girlscamp. A rating and a review is always much appreciated. If I can I actually did brave my reviews recently, and there was some very kind words there that I was very, very grateful for. So thank you for that. And thanks again for being here. Talk soon. Bye.